the yellow card scheme, which is there to report any adverse events related to the vaccine itself. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Tess Lawrie, Director of Evidence-Based Medicine Consultancy in Bath. Hi, Tess.
Hi, Mark.
Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, for those that don't know, what is the yellow card?
The yellow card system is a system that was set up in the 60s after the thalidomide tragedy, where thalidomide was given to pregnant women for nausea, and they didn't realize that it caused deformity in babies. So it was only many years later that it was 2 and 2 were put together that actually this very widely used medicine was harmful to babies in utero. So the yellow card system is actually, it's an early warning system whereby doctors and patients can report their side effects or possible side effects. You know, if they suspect the side effect is associated with the medicine that they're using, be it paracetamol or a COVID vaccine, they can report this to kind of raise an early alarm to any problems.
And as with any pharmaceutical or medical intervention, there's no reason why the COVID-19 vaccine should not feature in the yellow card scheme.
No, absolutely, it's really vital. It's a vital way of us monitoring, you know, what's happening, especially when we're rolling it out to so many people at the same time.
Yes, and I'm double vaccinated. I'm confident of the safety of the vaccine, but of course, no vaccine is without risk, and it's important to be grown up and honest about that, Tess, as people consider whether to have the jab.
Yes, I would agree with you.
In that case, and with that in mind, do you think that there is any concern about misinformation around the vaccine that could cause vaccine hesitancy when there is no reasonable reason to be afraid of it?
Well, you know, I've looked at the evidence, the data on the yellow card system, and I think there is reason to actually pause and ask the government for more information on these adverse events, because we've got the data up until the end of June, and it shows that 300,000 people have reported adverse events or side effects with the vaccines.
And this, though, is relatively normal, is it not, in relation to vaccinations? And do you think that the main...
Not at all, actually. I would just say it's not normal. If you take a vaccine like the tetanus vaccine, which has been around since 1968, there's only, 36 deaths reported again, attributed to it on the World Health Organization's database, whereas there's 7,000 deaths reported against the COVID vaccines in just a few months on the World Health Organization database. And on the UK's database, there's 1,440. So this is unprecedented, I would say, in the history of any medicine, to have so many deaths reported in such a short time, and indeed so many reports in such a short time against a medicine.
So would you therefore seek a pause altogether of the vaccine rollout in the UK, Dr. Lawrie?
Well, I would, because I tend to adopt the precautionary principle, and I think if there's any cause for concern, especially, in view of these alarming numbers of reports, we need to really get more information and follow up each and every report to find out a bit more about, its association and just indeed, is there cause for concern?
And are you not satisfied that the normal checks and balances are not in place, given the fact that, this has been approved for mass use?
I feel there is a lack of transparency from the regulatory bodies. I have a lot of questions when I read their report. For example, they highlight a problem with cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, which is a very rare brain clot in the brain, obviously, and they highlight that there have been 30 deaths associated with this in a couple of hundred cases. But when you look at the yellow card data, in actual fact, there have been 2,208 strokes reported. These are brain bleeds, and of those, 154 people died. So, these data are far more worrying to me than just the cerebrovenous sinus thrombosis data. And when you look at all sorts of bleeds and you look at the causes of death overall, you see that many of them are associated with bleeding and clotting. So we're seeing brain clots, and we're seeing heart clots, and also lung clots. So the commonest causes of death are brain clots or strokes, and then pulmonary embolism, which is a lung clot, and then heart clots, which is heart attacks. So I think there is cause for concern, and I would like to know more. I don't know about you, but I personally think that these should be investigated.
However, do you think that the idea of pausing the vaccine rollout for months, if not years to come, leaves us in this mess of a pandemic, Dr. Lawrie?
Not really, actually, because we now know that there are many safe, effective treatments for COVID. So COVID is treatable, it's not an untreatable condition. And there's a very safe medicine called ivermectin. I'm not sure if you've heard about it.
Sure, it's been talked about and should definitely be looked into, I agree. And it's relatively cost effective as well.
It's very low cost, and it's been around for 40 years. So on the World Health Organization's pharmacovigilance database, it's been registered since 1992. And they've only registered 20 deaths since 1992 against this very safe old medicine. That's widely used. It's been given billions of times because it's used against tropical parasites and is available over the counter in many countries.
What are your thoughts, Dr. Lawrie, on the vaccination of over 12s?
Well, I think they're really unnecessary and dangerous because a child has more chance of dying from a vaccination, looking at these figures, than they do from COVID.
And what about getting COVID itself? Because perhaps the relatively small risk of the vaccine is better than getting COVID. You know, we've heard about long COVID. It's certainly a nasty virus, isn't it? And perhaps best avoided.
Well, I think we all have robust immune systems. If you're not vulnerable and you're not very elderly, our immune systems are geared up to deal with viruses, bacteria, and others. So I think a lot of the side effects that we see with COVID, the long COVID and so on, can be prevented by early treatment. So we know with ivermectin, the earlier you treat, the better, and the doctors using it say that you don't get long COVID if you treat with ivermectin, in the very early stages of COVID. So if you've got a treatment for COVID, you don't have to be afraid of COVID.
I mean, it's none of my business, Dr. Lawrie, but would you care to share with my listeners whether you've had the vaccine or not?
Well, as I say, I always use the precautionary principle in my practice, as well as and I take responsibility for my own health. And I would like to see more safety data and more long-term safety data before taking this vaccine.
And you don't take the view that a pause on the vaccine rollout prolongs this nightmare, the COVID restrictions, lockdowns, and all the rest of it?
Not at all, because ivermectin actually works for prevention and treatment. So there are doctors around the world who've been taking ivermectin for a year already, and they take it prophylactically, and they haven't become sick. And there are many studies showing that if you roll it out to health professionals who are very at high risk, they do not get sick. So we have something that's very safe and effective that works for prevention and treatment, and there are other medicines that can be used for treatment. So in actual fact, there's no harm in pausing the vaccination program and saying, let's take a good look at these data, because ivermectin can actually end this pandemic.
And Dr. Lawrie, I'll draw our listeners to a very useful resource online for more information about the yellow card scheme. Can I ask for your overview as an expert on evidence-based medicine about lockdown strategy? 16 months of rolling lockdowns in the UK and across the world. What's your professional verdict on this approach?
Well,
has it worked? Have lockdowns worked?
Personally, I haven't seen any randomized controlled trials or any good evidence that lockdown or masks work. But more concerning, I think, or you know, I think with we've known that ivermectin works for some time. We've been trying to communicate. Doctors have been trying to communicate this message to the authorities, who have been very single-minded in their strategy and their approach. And if ivermectin had been employed last year, when certainly our UK authorities were notified, there would be no lockdown, in my opinion, and there would be no need for any of the measures.
Why did your message about this medication, about which I don't have the information, Dr. Lawrie, but why do you think that this message about applications such as ivermectin were ignored?
I think there are a lot of forces at play that we don't fully understand, particularly with regard to the huge COVID industry is a £100 billion industry a year probably, and ivermectin and other generic medicines are very cheap. And so, and of course,
Dr. Lawrie, being healthy, getting your body mass index down, which is a vaccine in itself, isn't it?
Well, I think it's time everybody took more responsibility for their health and got themselves into better shape. Were careful about what they eat, not just the quantity and the calories, but actually, you know, the nutritional value of what they eat, and exercise and sunlight and all sorts of things.
Of course, common sense,
including taking responsibility for the information. So, you know, anybody can go onto the yellow card system and have a look at those data. It's not that easy, to be honest, on the government system, but there's a group called UK Column. If you go onto the UK Column website, it's really easy to navigate. They've got a little, they take the data every week and they update the data, so you can see, you could put in, you know, just say your dad's had a stroke or something, you could type in stroke or cerebrovascular hemorrhage, or you could just look at neurological adverse events, or if you had a lot of bleeding with your periods, you can type in menstrual problem, menstrual irregularity, and you would see that, you know, whether this is an issue, whether this is what other people are reporting too. And I think if I could encourage everybody, if they think there's some kind of problem in association with a vaccine, if you have a vaccine today and tomorrow something happens to you, well, then report it, because it may be associated with the vaccine, and there might be many other people also suffering a similar thing. And it's only by highlighting these things, like with the thalidomide tragedy in the 1960s, it's only by highlighting these things that we will ever know, and that we will be able to ask the government to investigate.
But surely, finally, Dr. Lawrie, given the fact that the vaccine has been distributed around the world in different forms and different formula, that it's not comparable to the to that particular other tragedy that you talked about, the thalidomide.
Well, I think we have very little safety data on these vaccines. They're only under emergency use authorization. They haven't gone through the rigorous safety studies and the time. So they haven't gone through the rigorous, the 10-year period where it takes to develop and follow up. And we don't have the data. We just don't. Studies like randomized controlled trials are all very well for telling you whether something's effective, but it doesn't really tell you whether something's safe. Safety data is what you get from these pharmacovigilance databases and long-term follow-up.
Dr. Lawrie, really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Tess Lawrie.